Sorry, am I moving too fast? You can't say all of it? Yes, perfect. You can kind of see that.
Says mine.
I think for yours, yes. Not always for every single thing, but it was specific. Okay, I know some of you are still trying to get loaded up and all of that. Let me just tell you about this assignment. It's very straightforward, I think. Basically, you are continuing what we've been doing in class, where you are going to identify a theme in a story. Then you're going to identify certain literary techniques that writer is using to develop the theme. And you are going to, the prompt says, in a well-developed essay, explain how the author's portrayal of the characters, plot, and setting illuminates the meaning of a work as a whole. I stole that language from AP prompts since we're preparing you for AP in honors classes. It just means tell me about how these aspects of the story illuminate the theme. You may wish to consider such literary techniques, and then I have this big long list of literary techniques. So I want to write them up on the board as techniques that we have talked about so far in our short story unit. So the first thing we started with was narrative point of view. We talked a lot about how these different point of views sort of add to the general feeling of a story, any story, and then we looked at specifics with different stories to talk about how the narrative point of view affects it. So we've got first person, we've got third person. You guys wrote a worksheet that has all of the definitions. I don't remember what color, but you got it somewhere. In first person, we've got participant and observer, which is very interesting in How I Met My Husband, how those interact. And then in third person, we had limited and omniscient. We had objective, meaning they didn't necessarily insert their opinions, and we had editorial. Those are the main ones that you'll want to think about. So we talked about narrative point of view. We also talked about the setting, and with the setting, we talked a lot about atmosphere and mood. This was when we had that whole discussion about Harriman and how terrible you thought Harriman was, and all the different things that made up the setting, right? And how it created a kind of atmosphere or mood. So that was for setting. We also talked a bit about dialogue. We did this with the family supper, and we talked about what's included in dialogue, but also what is omitted. Omitted, two N's? No, anyway. What is left out? There we go. And how that might affect the themes. We talked about the plot. I gave you this term very quickly, but I gave you this term Bildungsroman when we were talking about How I Met My Husband and how it's a coming of age story. And we also talked about just plot structure in general and things like climax and rising action, falling action, resolution, all of that. You have a worksheet that shows you that. We have been talking with Metamorphosis a lot about diction, which is all about word choice. It's about the connotations and denotations of words. And we've been talking about syntax, which is word order and order of ideas. We didn't fully talk about this in this class, and I apologize, I missed it last time, but we talked about an allegory without maybe naming what an allegory is. So let me very quickly tell you about the allegory stuff. An allegory is, well, you tell me, what is an allegory for you? You might have heard this word before. Any ideas? Allegory is like a story that is so deeply symbolic that every part of the story plays into the symbolism of that story. So the whole story is representative of something else. An allegory has surface level meaning. So it'll have like characters and plots and all of that, but then underneath the surface, It is a deeper meaning that is symbolic. So a lot of people will say that the metamorphosis is an allegory. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but Marxists would probably say it's an allegory for the conditions of the working man, and that everything in the story explains the conditions of the working man. Other people have said that it might be an allegory for mental illness, which I find really interesting, that he is so anxious and so depressed about his working condition that he's kind of like shunned to another room and no one wants to think about him anymore. And then other people have said it's an allegory for physical illness, like terminal illness. It's as though Gregor gets, stage 4 cancer and he can no longer contribute to the family, and he's just sort of like hanging on, and the family doesn't know how to deal with him until he passes away. So there's lots of different ways that people have interpreted it allegorically. I just wanted to point that out because I missed that last time. All right, and then the last thing that we talked about with literary analysis was reading through a theoretical lens. And we looked at existentialism, and we looked at Marxism. Okay, so those were all the literary techniques that we were talking about. We were doing a lot of close reading, and we were looking at all of these different aspects of the story, right? I want you to think way back to the very beginning of the year. We did rhetorical analysis. You remember this with you wrote about Jamaica Kincaid, and we talked about it with Born a Crime, quite a while ago. But in that unit, we were talking about 3 other things you might want to talk about in these papers. We were talking about imagery, and with imagery, we were talking about metaphors and similes and personification and just descriptive imagery in general. We were also talking about repetition, the idea of words repeating, and syntax repeating, so sentence structure repeating. And then we also, with our rhetorical analysis unit, we learned this word juxtaposition, which is about putting 2 ideas next to each other to kind of compare and contrast them. So you've got a lot of options for stuff to talk about in these stories. You have a lot of ways that these authors are making language choices in order to back up whatever kind of themes that are in their work, or illuminate whatever kinds of themes are in their work. I am going to give you a minute now to look at your theme. Has everyone found the commentary, my comments on the theme? Okay, cool. I want you to look at your theme. If it's appropriate, it's time to try and revise that theme. Just open a Word doc to work on this, a Google Doc. Revise that theme, and I want you to try and turn it into a thesis statement. A thesis statement for a literary analysis is theme plus literary techniques. What language choices is the writer making to illustrate the theme? And if you're feeling very lost, I gave you lots of comments on your theme for a family supper. It's on the back. You wrote a thesis statement, and I gave you some comments about how that's working, which is the salmon colored sheet. Okay, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to try and write a thesis statement now. Let's get as far as you can.
Okay, what I was telling them is these are some examples of thesis statements that you could kind of model, not their ideas, but you can model the way that they're set up. I don't know why that's highlighted. Here we go. So that you can see how somebody could combine thoughts about a theme in a story with thoughts about literary qualities that create that theme. When you're thinking about literary qualities, you're just thinking about aspects of the story that are contributing to creating an overarching theme.
So I want to break it apart based on the theme. So when I look at this, I'm going to have paragraph 1 here, right underneath. Kafka claims that the working man is so disassociated from his physical conditions. That is the first part of my theme. So I need to prove that part first. I'm going to do working man disassociated from physical conditions. And then let's see, my second paragraph is going to be neglects human relationships. Okay, and then my third paragraph, it will give him a sense of fulfillment if he were to have those human relationships. So in this little section, I'm realizing that I am making some assumptions that I'm going to need to explain to my reader. It looks like I'm going to need to have to tell them that neglecting human relationships will lead Gregor to feeling lonely, alienated, ostracized, neglected, all of that. Whoops, I don't know how to spell ostracize. Look that up here in a second. And I want to say how if he were to have like these relationships with people, he might get a sense of fulfillment. But I think it might be powerful then to end my essay with the fact that he is a working man, but his working life will not allow for these kinds of relationships. I think I want to give it a bit of a circular quality here where it's like he's dissociated, causes him to neglect. This causes him to have sad feelings. It could be better, but it won't be because this story is so pessimistic. And then I would get to my conclusion. So do you see how I am looking at my thesis, my theme, and I'm seeing which parts of the theme I'm going to need to prove in which kind of order. What's really important here is that you're not trying to prove the entire theme in one paragraph. You only need to prove a bit of the theme in each paragraph. All right, I'm going to give you a few minutes now to start mapping out how your essay is going to go based on the theme. And look here, it's not the best language. I am just breaking apart the little ideas here.